And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Black and Blue Pod. I'm your host, Matt McLaughlin. Before we get started, like, comment, subscribe on the YouTube channel, follow us on all audio platforms, helps us out. I am bringing back the very first guest of the podcast because there's a very important issue that we need to discuss, which is Winning Time, the new HBO show about the Lakers dynasty. And this is probably a person that has done more basketball research than I will ever know in my life. The one and only Mr. Roland Lazenby. Roland, thank you for coming on the show again.
Sure. Thanks for having me back, Matt.
Appreciate it. So let's just jump right into it. Have you seen the show?
Oh, yes. I had to watch all of it and then do a weekly commentary with basketball breakdown. And so I've seen it all.
So what are your thoughts on it as a writer and as a basketball fan? Are those perspectives different or are they the same perspective on the show?
Well, gosh, there are several things. The first level, which is the most important, it's in the process of trying to make it sexier and have higher ratings for TV, they really abuse the facts. That's pretty common in Hollywood. But they did it with living people and really sort of smeared them badly and terribly inaccurately in some cases. And so that is a major fail. Having said that, I think that a lot of people have enjoyed it. And the ratings are good. And this is a show that's going to run for the best part of a decade, probably, because they're telling Showtime, and they only ended with the first title in 1980. So this is going to be, as The Ringer explained in one of its reviews, this is going to be like The Crown was for Netflix. It's just a long, slow unwinding of the Laker years. I've been writing a biography of Magic Johnson for the past, I'm sorry, my phone,
No worries.
For the past 4 years. So I've lived with this subject, a lot of it. And I would say that it has been maddening for me because, when you write a biography, you're going like crazy trying to pin every detail down. And these people are like tossing boulders around like they don't matter. But they speak to millions and millions of people who accept that as fact. My wife and I were looking at the show toward the end of the season. And then we later saw another show on Showtime called The First Ladies. It's about the First Ladies. And my wife said, I can never look at any show again, knowing how badly Hollywood abused the legacy of the Lakers. So having said all that, it is what it is. I guess I'm over most of my anger about it, but I was really surprised they chose to do what they did at first. And it's unfortunate.
And I would agree. It is very unfortunate, especially as basketball fans. We're introduced to these personas, especially a guy like Magic Johnson, who is the opposite of Larry Bird as they portray in this series. But in real life, that's how it was portrayed, as he was the smiling, perfect Hollywood poster for the Lakers.
And the casting of Magic was great. And that part of it, a lot of inaccuracies about certain details in his life, but the central character there, they got right.
Exactly. One character that I think they kind of blew up out of proportion is Jerry West. I think Jason Clarke is a fantastic actor, and for that show, he was great, but Jerry West is someone that you've researched, you talked to directly for your book on him. What were your thoughts on his character as the guy who's basically swearing every other word, competitive guy, of course, which I'm sure is how Jerry West is, but they kind of blew it up out of proportion. And it seemed like he hated being a Laker legend in the show. What was your reaction to that portrayal?
Um, they lampooned a lot of people. Jerry West is a very, very complicated guy. He is and was not now, no longer, but he was the guardian of the Lakers. And a younger generation of fans probably understands this, and if not, should know it. There's no way that Kobe becomes a Laker without Jerry West. Jerry West brought Shaq to the Lakers, and it was not an easy thing. But Jerry West did many things to make and keep the Lakers great. And so this is a cartoonish show. And so they made heavy cartoon fun of Jerry. I have information that I can't really share that makes it difficult for me to discuss this. But let's just say it sounds crazy to accuse the producers of bullying Jerry West. But if you knew the information I know about Jerry, they're literally bullying him in a way that you would never get away with. And that's hard to explain, and I'll just leave it at that. And so he fought back for himself. He's a very capable guy. Obviously, nobody in Hollywood wants to get into depositions in a legal battle. And so a lot of times stuff like this is just for show, to fire a salvo back at whoever is taking shots at you. So I don't know how serious it will end up being legally.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't get too outrageous legally as well, because I don't want people of my generation to think that that show's portrayal of Jerry West is who Jerry West was as a person. Because as a basketball fan, like he is one of the classiest guys on the court, didn't do anything outrageous, and has kind of lived in the shadow for most of his tenure, helping the Lakers front office, even the Clippers front office in recent years. And for one show to wipe all of that 5 decades of dedication to basketball at the professional level, that's outrageous to me.
Here's the truth about Jerry West. As a college player in 1959, he was in the NCAA championship game and played brilliantly against California. He was playing for West Virginia University, and he couldn't get a last shot. They lost by a point. He got his hands on the ball, could not get to a last shot. Great torment. As a pro, he and Elgin Baylor just lit up. The Lakers had just moved to Los Angeles when Jerry West was their first round draft pick. And of course, the dominant team of the decade was Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics. And 6 times the Lakers lost to the Celtics in the league NBA finals, in the championship series. The process of those 7, and then later a 7th time, Jerry's Lakers lost to the New York Knicks before they finally won a title in 1972. That long process and I think the thing that characterized Jerry West, he was that extremely competitive guy, insanely competitive. And of course, I have written 2 books on Kobe, one when he was young, and then a full biography called Showboat that came out in 2016 before he died.
Got it right behind my shoulder. One of the best books on the planet.
Thank you very much. But I consider Kobe sort of to be that inheritor of the Jerry West mantle, I guess you'd say. Now, there are a lot of people who care and sacrifice deeply, but it's probably fair to say that no two people ever cared more, which is saying a lot. Those guys cared on a deeper level, and it didn't always make them nice. It didn't always make the story sweet. In fact, they could be very difficult people to contend with. But neither one of them ever for an instant ever cheated the fans. Everything they had was all out, was nothing was left. Nothing was left off the court. Everything all out. And that's a pretty important legacy for the NBA.
I think that's why guys like Kobe, guys like MJ, guys like Jerry West are revered for so long and have their legacies have carried on for decades now, because fans respect that. Fans respect when guys leave it all out on the court. And Kobe always mentioned Jerry West when he was talking about mentors and public interviews and stuff like that. And
Jerry West mentored all those Lakers stars. I mean, he really did. He considered that part of it, the top part of his job as GM. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, you're completely right. And it's clear that he loves the organization so much and wants to help them so much. And for anyone that isn't aware of how competitive he is, watch the Lakers Celtics 30 for 30 series. You don't even have to watch the full series. Like 20 minutes in, he says, like, I couldn't look at a basketball for months or years during those losses to the Celtics.
He told me it destroyed his life in a lot of ways. The bad news for Lakers fans is that HBO, Jeff Pearlman is the author of Showtime, and he also wrote Three Ring Circus about Kobe and Shaq. Both are really good books. I'm a fan of his work. But he was not his book, Three Ring Circus, sort of reflected that Jeff was not any great fan of Kobe's. Mm. So you can extrapolate, it may not be, but when HBO comes to do Three Ring Circus, you can probably surmise that Kobe's going to get the Jerry West treatment in those things. He is going now. It's different. Jerry West is in his 80s. He's an old guy. I mean, he's not an old guy. He's a youthful old guy.
Well, and
that didn't stop them with him. So the fact that Kobe's deceased I don't know what effect that'll have.
Well, what is good news for Lakers fans is that there is the Hulu documentary series dropping later this year, supposedly. And Jeannie Buss, I think, tweeted out or put out a statement saying, like, obviously that most of this is false. She confirmed the one scene with Jerry Buss and Magic, like agreeing to be quote unquote business partners with the Lakers, was accurate. Right. But that is the saving grace of the Lakers franchise, is that they will have complete access to Jerry West, to all these legends, hopefully, that are still around, especially guys like Kareem.
Jerry West have been battling pretty heavily, this year.
That's also true. So we'll see about that.
They are not fans of each other, so I don't know where that goes. Jeannie has that connection to Phil, and Phil Jackson and Jerry West have long had this thing.
But as we've talked about in this episode, Jerry's love for the Lakers has kind of transcended previous personal relationships, and even getting a figure like Kareem, who doesn't really talk publicly much. I think he'll be involved with that. And Kareem's portrayal in this, if there's one character that's accurate within the slightest fraction, it's Kareem. Like, it feels like Kareem's portrayal by Solomon Hughes seems the most accurate of his resent for the media. He wasn't open, and he was the opposite of Magic Johnson pretty much. But what were your thoughts on that?
I think your assessment's correct. And I think I think Kareem, for the most part, is portrayed accurately. I was trying to think if there's, and the details are all moved around. What we've just seen of this whole series, this whole season, they've taken things that happened years down the road and pulled them all back and shoved them into this first season and made it seem like there was a big financial crisis. And those things would happen, but they didn't happen right in that season. And so it's going to be interesting to see where they go from now, because they've shoved everything into this one year. But I'm sure they'll come up with plenty of devices, whether real or imagined, for these following seasons.
Exactly. And for whatever reason, and now we're talking reality, and when Paul Westhead finally gets the job, he changes the style completely for the Lakers, which kind of slowed them down. And after that season, they won the first title, which to me didn't make any sense. This isn't in the show. This is just real life. Like, they kind of went from using Jack McKinney style to much more slowed down and post play, which to me kind of felt redundant because they just had all the success with the run and gun style. And now they want to go back pretty much. Or am I misassessing that as a fan?
Well, I explained this in detail in a book that I have coming out in 2023.
Fair.
And it's a complicated scenario, but and it will always be open to question.
Yeah.
Let's just say it was a huge misunderstanding.
Fair.
And that the Lakers were a very unusual team. Incredibly talented, but really all sorts of talent that required a lot of thinking by coaches. I do believe that Showtime grossly overstates the role of Jack McKinney, or any coach for that matter. And the idea that Jerry West spent all this time worrying about, the strategy of a coach. Jerry West believes in one thing, as he's explained to me many times. He believed in talent. He believed you get the best players as long as you're organized, but you talent first. And so all of this stuff is really the part of it that's made up by people who haven't spent the time inside of that to understand just how much that was Jerry West's belief. There's no special coaching magic, no pun intended, but there's no special coaching touch or formula.
It's Jack McKinney comes off as this like basketball guru that knows how, like Phil Jackson before Phil Jackson. Like, Phil Jackson's perception is that he's this guy that like sees beyond the court and knows these intricate patterns and all this stuff. And it's like, the fact that in the show, Jerry West is portrayed as refusing to want to draft Magic Johnson because he doesn't want to change how the team operates play style wise. To me, that doesn't make any sense, because
and again, that's a complicated matter that I first dealt with 32 years ago with Jerry West. and in a recorded interview I explained that in my later book. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
But Jack McKinney coached the Lakers for 14 games. And Jeff Pearlman, when he was starting this, he reached out to me about access to my sources. And we discussed then how difficult it is to write about the Lakers. A lot of players are very reluctant to get involved with a person writing a book. It's hard to get people to talk to you. Now, I had done projects back before this became an issue. And Jeff Pearlman has quoted, not too extensively, the fair amount, and he's given me all the credit. He's been very gracious about that to me in his books. But I do know that the sources you get, you sometimes tend to really dig into them because you don't have everybody. And so I think Jeff correctly saw this was an opportunity to explain more of this part of the story. But I think sometimes when you do that, you get an outsized influence. You make people bigger than they are. Claire Rothman, the lady who's supposedly the wizard running she was important. The Lakers didn't have many employees, but this whole thing about Jeannie Buss being there, as Jeannie explained to me personally, she was a high school kid. She was not, she had helped her dad with his tennis team. He had a pro tennis team, the LA Strings. But she was later, she got married to a volleyball player and went to Europe. She was at USC. She would become very involved later with things, and she could hardly recall any of the on-court events. In a number of interviews I did with her, she's just very honest about it. And so what they've done is distort things for dramatic purpose that really are not the story of what really happened. I guess you could say that the story that did happen is pretty charming and fascinating. And so I'm not sure you had to do that, but I'm not the people who are immensely successful at making HBO series. And Adam McKay, the showrunner, producer, whatever you call it, he's immensely powerful. And this is the way he sought to do it. He has that power. And so we'll see where it goes.
It's brilliant television. It's brilliant the way it's edited, it's put together. I just encourage people, whether you're a basketball fan or not, to not take this series as gospel for everything and 100% accurate.
Right. It's about, Lon Rosen, Magic's agent, was talking to me about it. And he said, this thing is maybe 10% accurate. They did have the Lakers winning the championship, and they had other things, had the people, but there was gross distortion and just outright rewriting and changing everything. There's so many things that have been blown up into major things that aren't true or are misunderstood. But that's the nature of the beast, I guess. So
hey, Red Auerbach seems legit. That seemed like
but he never had that meeting with Jerry. They were not meeting and talking. That was not something that the idea that they came to that never happened.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Roland. Anything you would like to plug for the people to know?
Well, my book Magic, the life of Earvin Magic Johnson, comes out in 2023. So if you're interested in such a thing, keep an eye out for it.
And also check out your other books, Michael Jordan, The Life, one of the best biographies you could get on Michael Jordan, and also Showboat biography on Kobe. I've personally read those two. Roland,
that's very kind of you, Matt. Much appreciated.
Of course, those are the two staples that got me into writing about sports. I was like, I was reading those and I was like, oh my God, like, yeah, I want to do this. I want to know about the Lakers and all this stuff.
Well, I have to tell you that reading David Halberstam's The Breaks of the Game 40 plus years ago about the Portland Trail Blazers in 1977.
Yeah.
That book had the same effect on me. So that's how it works.
It's all coming full circle. Who knows? Maybe I'll publish my own book one day.
It's just a matter of doing what you're doing. You keep digging and interviewing. And, when I started, I will say this, I worked for a weekly newspaper. There were no computers, just typewriters. And so, I left being a high school coach to become a sports writer. at a weekly newspaper because there weren't any jobs. Today, with the internet and with technology, there are far more sports jobs than there used to be, and far more opportunities to build a franchise. So, hats off to you.
Thank you, Roland. Really appreciate it. I'll let you get going.
Having me.
Of course, and hopefully we'll talk again in the future.
I look forward to it, Matt.